Today, I'll be sharing a couple of practical web design improvements you can apply to your blog to increase its on-page click-through rate. These design improvements can help visitors navigate your blog more effectively and encourage them to carry out desired actions. But first, let's ensure we're on the same page about click-through rates and why they are important in improving your site's conversions. Click-through rate, or CTR for short, refers to the ratio of the number of clicks on a specific link or call to action to the number of times users or visitors are shown to them.
While this metric serves as a fundamental performance indicator for evaluating the success of various online marketing initiatives, this video focuses more on practical, hands-on design improvements that can be applied across an entire blog to maximize the number of clicks we get as blog owners from these hypertext links, banners, and call-to-action buttons. Just a quick heads up before we get started, most of what we'll be doing in this video will be created and styled using Elementor Page Builder. Getting started with the customization process, the base theme used on this site is Hello Elementor. For the blog layout, I utilized Elementor's theme builder settings to create a single post layout that dynamically applies to all posts. For those of us who don't have the pro version of Elementor, there are several third-party add-ons that can extend your site's theme building capabilities beyond the basic version. Now I'm going to run through the styling options I've used to create these layouts before we start making design improvements for higher click-through rates. For those who already have existing and functional blog layouts, feel free to skip ahead to other parts of this video using the timestamps provided. To begin, after choosing a title for the theme builder template, I've gotten rid of the site's header and footer to create a distraction-free experience by changing the page layout to Elementor Canvas. Returning to the page settings, the HTML tag was set to article. And for the preview settings, we have this dynamically set to post, which we want applied to all blog posts. Now let's move over to the style options to add a little bit of contrast between the background and the containers we'll create in a minute. So I'll be changing the entire layout color from white to #F4. I'd like to mention that some of the design improvements we'll be using here are inspired by WP Beginner's website, which is currently one of the largest WordPress resource sites on the web. Moving on, let's add a Flexbox container with 3 columns. The first column will contain the blog content, the second will provide spacing between the first and third, and the third container will hold promotional banners, newsletter signups, and other relevant information we want visitors to see. I'll set the content width for the entire container to 1295 pixels, ensuring it matches the layout width of my entire website. Next, I'll be adding 30 pixels padding to the top and bottom of this container. So let's head to Advanced and unlink all paddings to add 30 pixels to the top and 30 to the bottom. Focusing on the containers within, the first container will be set to 65% width, the second will be set to 10%, and the last 25%. I noticed while remaking these layouts with Elementor containers that when I tried to change the container width using this adjustment option, it didn't quite give the desired result. So I had to adjust the first container manually by dragging this out to match the desired width of 65%. After which I went ahead to make precise adjustments using the adjustment option. Let's repeat the same process for the second container, and we can leave the third one as it is. Shifting our focus to the first container, let's begin by changing its background color to white while adding a distinctive border around it. To do so, open up the style options and change its background to white. Next, open the border options and change the border type to solid. For its width, let's set it to 1 pixel and its color to #CCC. Before adding our elements to this container, let's quickly add a side banner to the right. That's assuming you don't have an ad banner automatically displayed here. So search for the image widget and drag it into this container. I already have an image ready for this, so I'll choose that. Now let's get rid of the padding automatically set around this container so it aligns perfectly with the container we have to the left. Having a look at our reference page, we can see that it has a subtle border around it. This was done deliberately to intermittently draw users' attention to it. To achieve this look, let's return to our design canvas and add 5 pixels padding to all sides of the image. And while we're at it, let's scroll down to open the background option and change that to white. Lastly, open up the border option to add a solid border to all sides of the image banner. We'd be going with a border width of 1 pixel to maintain that subtle appearance where it almost seems as though it's part of the image. This is optional and fairly straightforward, but if you wish, you can also add a call to action button underneath this banner. I'll proceed either way, but increase the video's pacing a bit for those who want to achieve this same look. Taking a look at WP Beginner's blog layout, we see at the very top, it consists of a series of clickable links showing the site's hierarchical structure. These are called breadcrumbs navigation. The primary purpose of breadcrumb navigation is to provide users with easy navigation and quick access to related content within the same category. To enable breadcrumbs on your blog posts, I recommend you use SEO tools like Rank Math, Yoast, or other SEO plugins that have these schema markups embedded into their core features. So whichever tool you've settled to use for your site, it may be best at this point to look up how to enable this feature. Since I use Rank Math for the sites I own and manage, to enable this feature, I'd have to return to my site's dashboard and select Rank Math SEO. Let's scroll down to make sure the schema module is enabled. Upon confirming it is, navigate to General Settings and then select Breadcrumbs. Enable this option if it isn't already enabled, and go ahead with making edits to these settings as you see fit. For instance, the first option lets us choose or set a custom separator character as seen on our reference site. The next option allows us to disable or enable the homepage link to be displayed within the breadcrumbs, while also specifying the text we want it displayed as. For the other settings, you can find more information about them on this page, which I'd leave a link to in the video's description. Let's save this for now and move on to copy the shortcode provided. Then head back to Elementor's design canvas. Now search for the shortcode widget. Drag that into this container and paste the code we copied into this field. There's a chance the entire breadcrumb may not display as it should on this page, so we may need to view this addition when we've finished our edits and conditioned the theme builder template to be applied to all blog posts. In addition to this, Rank Math outlines that you can add and style the breadcrumbs feature as a widget within Elementor when the pro versions of both Elementor and Rank Math are installed. So unless you have the pro versions of both plugins installed, you can resort to using CSS to style its appearance to match your site's aesthetics, just as I did here. Moving on, let's add paddings to all sides of this container to match what we have here. Head to the advanced settings, and let's make this 40 pixels to all sides. And that brings us to the next element, the post title. Simply drag the post title underneath the breadcrumbs widget, and let's make sure this is set to an H1 tag for SEO reasons. Making edits to the font properties, let's open up the Style tab and begin by setting the font color to #1A1D20. For the font's typography, I'd be using the font family Inter. Its size would be 25 pixels, the weight set to 700, and the line height set to 25 pixels. Taking a closer look at the breadcrumbs widget, we should notice it has a little bit of extra margin set to the bottom. Let's get rid of that by adjusting the bottom margin to -15 pixels. The next element we want added to this container would be the post information. And just like that of our reference site, we'll be adopting some of its layout settings while adding a little spin to ours. Referring back to this page, we'd want to arrange the post information accordingly, starting with categories and ending with comments. Heading back, let's rearrange the items by dragging the time item to the very top, as we'd be changing that in a minute to post categories. This would be followed by the date the post is published, then the post author, with comments being the last item.
Making edits to the post info items, let's begin with changing the first item to terms. And for its taxonomy, let's make that post categories. Taking a look at our page reference, we can see that category is spelled out before displaying the category to which the post belongs. To do this, we need to fill in the text category into the field labeled as before. Let's leave the post category link turned on to be clickable. And since I'd like to stick with a minimal look for this section, I'd be using outline icon styles for all of these items. So let's change this to custom and search to select this folder icon. For the date item, I'd make this last updated on as the before text and change the bold icon style to that of an outline. Before moving on to the third item, let's turn off the clickable link for the date item, as I noticed search engines tend to crawl these date links just as we have here, and we don't want that. Moving on to the author item type, the before text should be by, with the constant variable being the display name within the site's administrator profile. For the comment item type, let's just change the icon to match what we have on the reference page. Once all of that is done, let's move on to style the post info. And I'll begin by adding a 30 pixel spacing between these items. Let's add a divider between these items by toggling this on, and we can leave the other options within this tab as they are. Opening the icon tab, I'd only want to change the color of these icons to something lighter, like hashtag 54595F, while its size can remain the same. Opening the text options, I'll be adding an 8 pixel indent between the icons and text. The text color also needs to be the same as the icons. Moving on, let's open up the typography options, and I'd make the font family GT Walsheim. Its font size would be 13.2 pixels, and its weight set to 500. Before we move on to the next element within the blog layout, let's add padding to the top and bottom of the post info widget. So head to Advanced and make this 15 pixels to the top and 15 pixels to the bottom. Let's add a border separator to this widget, so it adopts a divider look between the post heading and the featured image that would be set underneath this. To achieve this look, open the Border tab and let's make this dotted. Afterward, we can allow the border to be displayed only to the top and bottom by adding 1 pixel to them. Let's make the border color hashtag AAAF and the border radius 0 on all sides. Moving on to the next element, I'd be adding the featured image widget to this container. Let's make the image resolution full, and I'd be adopting this signature look by adding paddings of 2 pixels to all sides of the image, followed by adding a solid border within the advanced settings. The border width should be set to 2 pixels, its color set to black, and the border radius set to 0 on all sides. Moving on, let's add a divider underneath the featured image and make its style dotted to match what we already have going on. Let's follow suit with the color code we've chosen for the first set of dividers, which is hashtag AAAF. Lastly, reduce the gap set to the top and bottom to 10. Moving on to the next item, which is probably the most important, the post content. Before we add that in, let's duplicate this divider. And underneath this could be where the post comments go. This widget is likely going to take after the theme's predefined skin, so there isn't particularly much we can do here, aside from customizing it with CSS or other additional code. Let's head back to the widgets panel and drag the post content in between these dividers, which is likely going to populate this page with the last written blog post on this site. So far, the elements we've added within this container are the most essential in setting up a standard blog post layout. But of course, you're welcome to include additional features like social share buttons or disclaimer sections like those on our reference site. Wrapping this up before heading to an individual blog post to point out other design improvements we can make to increase a blog's CTR. Let's first condition this layout to dynamically apply to all blog posts on this site. Simply select the Update button, and let's choose the condition to be applied to all posts. Then save and close. Moving on to make edits to the individual blog posts, let's head to our site's backend and open up all posts. I've gone ahead and created a dummy post with just as much content to point out the design improvements I'd like to share with you. Before proceeding to edit this page with Elementor, it's important I point out that you shouldn't overlook the SEO benefits that come with adding an alt text to your featured images when creating a post. Rank Math happens to encourage this SEO practice as a ranking factor within its test scores, as indicated here. To get a good score on this recommendation, it advises using the primary or focus keyword for the blog post as the alt text for the featured image. You can find more information about this using the info tip icon. Moving on with editing this post with Elementor, in case you haven't noticed, we'd be using a listicle post type to achieve these design improvements, as it contains most of the variables several post types use to make visually compelling blog posts. Getting started, I'd like to add a customizable underline underneath each hypertext link that appears anywhere on our post. Since we'd mostly be using text headings and editors to create our written content, we need to find a way to make the hypertext external and internal links stand out from the rest to grab users' attention in carrying out desired actions. Speaking of which, you can experiment with a handful of variables like using standout colors in line with your site's branding, or a combination of variables when the situation calls for it. To achieve this look, I've made the text I'd love to add this external link to bold, coupled with changing its color to match the design above, which we'd be coming to in a minute. Cutting to the chase, we'd use the CSS lines of code linked in the video's description. For those of us with the Pro version of Elementor, you can simply head over to the Advanced tab and insert the provided CSS into this field. For those with the basic version of Elementor, you can also make this addition within the Customizer settings under Appearance and Additional CSS. Heading back to Elementor, I would say we might face a little bit of a problem with adding these CSS lines of code to each individual text editor for this effect to be applied, and that just seems a little impractical. So instead of doing that, we can just apply this code to every single post that would and has ever been written on this website. So what better place to apply this code if not within the single post template we designed earlier? So let's open that up and click on the settings icon at the bottom left corner. Then navigate to the Advanced section and insert the code into the Custom CSS tab. Remember to click Update to save the changes. While there isn't much to change here, I'm sure some of us might be interested in adjusting the line height or the colors for its constant and hover state. Apart from the height adjustment we've just made, the underline color can be modified with the line of code labeled background color, while the hover color can be adjusted using the hover background color. Simply adjust the color hex codes in both places, and the changes will take effect instantly. With that CSS line of code affected across all blog posts, we can then proceed with refreshing the single post page to see our changes. Let's briefly talk about this design, which was originally inspired by Better Studio, another WordPress resources website. Upon my first visit to one of their listicle posts, I honestly fell in love with how these designs were made. I bet these have been templatized in a design tool where they get to change the featured product's screenshot or software being talked about for each section. This is easy to tell because all of this is an image. Like with every inspiration, I went ahead to reproduce a version of this look with a little spin to it within Photoshop. And it came out looking really nice. However, it almost seemed exhausting at some point that I'd have to keep changing things every single time. By so doing, I always kept finding a way to force certain screenshots that may just have higher resolutions, either in height or width, to fit into the templatized design. I wanted something a little better that can always change in size to fit the screenshot or image I throw at it, and that's how I came about this. To recreate this, I'd add in a single Flexbox container. Before we add our featured image, let's remove the padding automatically set to all sides of this container. Now add the image widget to this container, and let's choose our featured image highlighting the hero section of Better Me's website. Moving forward, you may have noticed I sort of have a thing for borders set to all sides of an image as it isolates the image from the noise of the written contents around them. Ideally, this is meant to help the images stand out so that when a user gets to the part containing an image, they get a more immersive experience with the images other than having a plain image without one. This is something you can experiment with for your posts moving forward. Either way, let's shift our focus back to recreating this. With the image selected, simply head to the Advanced tab and add 2 pixels to all sides of this image. Now we can approach adding a border around this image using either the container or the image itself. For this demonstration, I'd be going with the former, so let's select the container, head to Style, open the Border tab, and make the border type solid with a 4-pixel border width. While experimenting with using a single color across all the featured sections, again, I like the experience I had with Better Studios, where each section is color graded to match what is being highlighted. To do the same, let's make the border color the same as the most prominent color within this image using the color picker. According to statistics, visitors are 28% more likely to click on a call to action button than on an image or hypertext link. That's why we have this button added to this section in order to maximize the number of clicks we get when users browse through our content. To recreate this, we have to add a new container underneath the first. And as you can tell, we'd be using 2 columns for this layout. After that, remove the paddings set to the container by default. Let's make the content width full, followed by adding a border to the sides of this container, excluding the top as that has been covered by the container above it. This would be followed by changing its color to match this look. Moving on, let's add a button to the first column, followed by choosing a call to action text that is a little hard to ignore. I'd be choosing an external SVG icon for this. You should find a link to this page in the video's description. Moving on to style this up, let's leave the alignment set to the left. For its typography, let's make the font family Poppins. its size set to 14 pixels, and the weight set to 400. Now let's make the background color the same as the color scheme for this section. And let's add 2 pixels to all sides of the button's border radius. For the button's padding, let's unlink all values here and make the top and bottom padding 20 pixels. And to the left and right, let's make that 30 pixels. Before we move on to make final edits to these columns, let's make one little change to the button using the Advanced tab. This is optional, but I'd recommend you change the button's width to inline and its alignment to the center. While this might seem like we have excess padding set to the bottom of this container, when we take a preview of this page by closing the editor, we should be able to see how this truly looks on the front end. Although this can be remedied by adding a spacer widget into the second container. As we wrap things up, let's reduce the width of the first container to 45%. I want to add a 4-pixel border width to the right side of this container, so open the Border tab, make the width solid, unlink all values, and add 4 pixel to the right, again changing this to the corresponding color. Lastly, let's head back to the Layout tab of this container to make the min height 100 pixel and justify its content to the center. It goes without question that we also need to add a hover effect to this call to action button. Let's switch to the Hover tab, and instead of choosing any of these hover animations, I recommend sticking with slightly darker colors in line with the primary color hex code. We just have to drag this down a little to make it darker. Now that we are done with all of this, I believe the next proper thing to do from here is to focus on device responsiveness. Before we delve into that, I'm hoping this video does well, and that the YouTube algorithm picks up on it with your help. So please, I'd appreciate it if you like this video. And if you are feeling generous enough, you can just slide in a little comment below to show your appreciation for the value if you've gotten any so far. That said, I might just do follow-up videos about other web design and SEO improvements you can apply to your blog to immediately start seeing an increase in organic traffic. Again, the engagement on the video would tell if this is something you guys are interested in. Now, let's talk about device responsiveness for all we've done so far, starting with the single post template we created using the Elementor theme builder. Most of all we've done is easily customizable, and for starters, we've been focusing on desktop responsiveness all this while. Now let's move over to the laptop responsiveness. We could begin by increasing the content width for the first container to about 75%, and we could reduce the second container to 5%. This can be followed by reducing the sizes of most of the elements to fit right into this container, just as they fit within the desktop responsiveness. I could set the post title's font size to 24 pixels, and the same applies to the post information. We could reduce the spacing between these items to 20 pixels instead of 30. Additionally, I could reduce the content width of the entire container to 1000 pixels, so we have spacing on the left and right sides of this container. The same applies to the padding set to the top and bottom of this container. Let's make that 10 pixels. Taking a quick look at our content, we can see most of the information within fits just right. Lest I forget, we can also consider reducing the padding set to the first container if you wish. Moving over to the tablet responsiveness, the first thing I'd like to do is probably get rid of the second and third containers using the responsive tab to hide both containers on the tablet and mobile devices. You can find this option under Advanced within the Responsive tab. With these containers hidden, I can then proceed to make this container 100% full width. Again, when we scroll through in this tab, we can see it looks good. Moving down to mobile responsiveness, we can apply the same by reducing the padding set to all sides of this container. I'd wrap this up by heading back to the single post where we created the call to action section. Let's begin by hiding the second section at its bottom using the Responsive tab under Advanced. This should be followed by getting rid of the border set to the right side of this container. To do so, let's navigate to Style, open the Border tab, and set the border width for all sides to 0 pixels. And this is what we get after previewing this look. Making final edits to this container, let's remove the padding automatically set to its sides. We can also reduce the button's font size to 12 pixels. And finally, decrease the padding set to the container's min height to 80 pixels. And with that, we'll call this a wrap. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.